Hello, we have a special guest today because Justus Oehler is not only a great designer, member of Alliance Graphique International, but also partner of Pentagram, perhaps the place where every visual designer has wanted to work at least once in his career. Being a partner of Pentagram, I think, is not only a great honor and a great professional satisfaction, but also a great responsibility. Because Pentagram is not only a legendary group of founders that we know, Fletcher, Crosby, Forbes, Grange, and Vlasky, but also now the largest design group in the world. Engaged in all the fields of visual identity, industrial design, exhibit design and packaging, advertising, and digital design experiences. Pentagram, since its birth in London in 1972, has transformed the world with its creations, introducing a new paradigm of visual culture, the use of lettering and quality and design of messages and the organization of information, the role of design. An independent international network with the enhancement of skills and through an original organizational model. The formula to guarantee creative independence and collaboration between different intelligences to maintain lifelines and defend against homologation. We live in a global society where good design contributes every latitude to improve our lives. And the contribution of Pentagram in almost half a century has been fundamental to evolve scenarios and ensure a progressive quality in our daily lives. We must admire Pentagram, but we must be grateful to all the designers who have managed it and who today, through that high standard model, push all the other designers in the world to express themselves better and better every day, looking for excellence in every project. Justus, our next lecturer at the Master in Visual Design, is a partner of Pentagram in Berlin, and I'm very glad and proud to introduce him today at our Raffles talk. Justus studied visual communication in Munich and completed his studies in London with a master's degree in graphic design. He joined Pentagram in 1989 and became a partner in 1995. His portfolio is full of prestigious works and awards, and his story will stimulate your wonder and admiration. I remind everyone that the Q&A section is open, where you can ask Justus your questions. Thank you, Justus, to share this talk with us. It is a gift for us and for me too. We look forward to seeing you soon in Raffles, Milano. Thank you very much. I'm saying hello to all because this is our last talk and we are closing this with a friend and a very, very high appointment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Franco. Thanks for your kind words. I will start. I've prepared about 120 slides, so I'll have to be really fast. I am a graphic designer, and as you've heard, and there are designers and designers and designers. Everybody approaches design from a different angle. I'm a very hands-on person. I'm not an academic, so I try to put a lot of common sense into this presentation. Nothing to worry about. I'm just checking. Right, here we go. The title of my presentation is Be Aware. It's not specific to designers, but I think as we designers play a certain role in our world, we have to be sometimes more aware than other people. Just to start with a cartoon that I did a while ago. There are different attitudes towards design, and its logic is not always part of it. So this one here is two guys looking out of the window of Coca-Cola, and one says, "There goes our new head of communication. Do you know why he's been sacked?" And the other one says, "Oh, I heard he suggested to the board to redesign our brand identity." So two companies like Coca-Cola, for example, their brand identity is sacrosanct. You don't touch it. But you could imagine a situation like this in the Vatican. Your Holiness, if we want to see more people in our churches, maybe we should get our logo redesigned. Franco mentioned Pentagram and also the first line when he was set up, and that we have offices in 4 locations at the moment, and Berlin is one of them. It's Austin and Berlin are small offices, London and New York are large offices. I think the most important thing about us is that we are owner-managed. That means the 25 partners who are currently running Pentagram are also the owners of the business. That makes us independent and free. We are not the largest design agency, but we are the largest independent design agency. We don't belong to anyone else, and that means that we don't have to create profits for other people. It's very important because it allows us to concentrate on design and on what we do without having to always justify why we spend time on it and how much time we spent on it and how much cost we incur. You could call it a creative cooperative. We are also by nature international. We have a new Italian partner, as you know. We have a German partner. You're just looking at him. We have an Argentinian partner, American partners, British partners, Indian partner, and so on. We come from all parts of the world, and from the beginning on, Pentagram saw itself as an international organization, looking beyond because it started in London, looking beyond the borders of the British Empire. We have a very flat structure. We don't like bureaucracy. For that reason, that most large creative agencies have a very complicated setup. They have many people in their organizations. They have layers of management. And as a client, you would usually not talk to the designers directly, but you would talk through account managers and project managers and the creative director about your work. And the designers are usually the people in the back room who create the designs, but they're not even presenting their own work. They give their work to their account manager, and the account manager presents to the client, and then the client talks to the account manager. And it creates something that you could call Chinese whispers, if you know that term. That means information gets lost in the process. The ideal setup would be a client talking to the designer directly, and the designer, in that case, an intelligent designer, an experienced designer, could reply directly to the client. And so in the conversation, you could start creating something, which is the creative process. And this is what our system, our business is based on. We have 25 partners. They're all running their own projects with their teams, and the contact is very, very direct client designer contact. That's what we look like. We meet twice a year. This was because of Corona. It was the first year where we didn't meet in person, so we had our first Teams meeting. This presentation is about the guy on the right with the arrow on top of him. That's me. And when I talk about myself, I have to admit that I've been around for a number of years. I'm almost 60 years old, so more than half of a century I have spent on this planet. Look at the timeline. It's quite impressive. This is where I start in 1961, and I was born in Tokyo because my parents lived there at the time. We moved to France I went to kindergarten in Marseille. We then moved back to Japan. I started school there, and then eventually we moved to Greece, to Athens, and I finished school in 1969. 3 years later, Pentagram was founded. Yeah, it's important to know. So I'm older than my company, which is good. Then I finished school in Athens in 1980, and then moved to Munich to study graphic design. This was in 1982, and if you look at the top, that little image, this is how Apple emerged on the tables of some crazy designers who thought that this computer was a miracle. I was actually applying to a master's degree in Basel, Switzerland, and Wolfgang Weingart was one of the professors there. He had this computer on a table surrounded by his students, and they created some line patterns on it. And I thought, what is that? That's never going to happen. This is how little we knew, but you can see that it's not that long ago, 1984. After Munich, after finishing my course, I started working for a designer called Rolf Müller, who was a very, very good designer, typographic designer. If anybody knows Otto Eicher, who created pictograms, who invented pictograms probably, and created the design for the Olympics in Munich, Rolf Müller was his partner in that, not in the business, but in that project. I learned a lot there, but he was very strict, and I was not ready for strictness. So I left him a year and a half later, moved to London for a master's degree at Central. And if you look at the top, in the same year, 1987, Quark Express was launched. The younger students will not know Quark Express, but you know InDesign. Quark Express was the predecessor of InDesign. I started in Pentagram London in 1989, and this was when, we didn't have mobile phones. The first mobile phones you could even think of affording, and they were still very expensive, only came to the market 3 years later. Usually Motorola or Nokia or Ericsson, those were the three brands. And the World Wide Web that everybody uses today wasn't even there yet. That only happened, it was there, but it wasn't there kind of, for everyone. That only sort of started in the mid-90s. And my first ever digital camera, I bought in 2000. It was one of the first ones that you could afford, that you could buy. So you can see that a lot of technology happened in a very short amount of time. I set up Pentagram Berlin in 2002. And if you look at the top again, 5 years later, the first iPhone came to the market. I don't know what that says about me, but it just means that, it says you can be a designer without all of that stuff, because there was very good design before 1984. But now that we have the stuff, we have to be aware of what that stuff does. The App Store opened in 2008. Now, today, everybody's talking about apps. The life of a graphic designer is today dominated by apps. Every client wants an app. The word app was created by Apple when they created the App Store in 2008, 12 years ago. This is not history, it's kind of yesterday. And this is where we are here and now. As I said, a traditional graphic designer, and I design, what I like most is designing logotypes. And I've done a number of them. Not all of them are good, but they all have a history. And what I like about them is even I now cannot say which one was created when. Which one was created post-computer, which was created in an analog time, in analog days when there was no digital help. If you look at the top left, the BFF, for example, I did this in the agency of Rolf Müller in Munich. We had these dots typeset by a typesetting company. They arrived on a sheet. I cut them out with scissors and stuck them on a board with glue. This is how that logo was created, and it's still being used today. So times have changed. but also because we're not just designers, we're also human beings and we live in this world. Have a look at all the wars, and these are not even all the wars. There are some of the wars that happened during my life. If you look at the far left, you see just the end of World War II. Yeah? 16 years later, I was born. It's nothing. When I was born, there was already a war in Vietnam. And then going forward, you can see the Lebanon War, the first Gulf War, the Chechen wars, in Yugoslavia, Croatia, Bosnia, one in a row, then the Iraq War. And currently we have a number of wars happening as we speak, Afghanistan, Ukraine, and so on. Another chart that is sort of depressing is the environmental story. If you look at the top again, amazing, but microplastic in oceans was first discovered in the 1970s. This is not new. This has been going on for a long, long time. Global warming was first mentioned in 1975. 1976, you had the Seveso poison and cloud in Italy, which was a terrible, terrible accident. You had the Amoco Cadiz oil spill in 1978, and so it goes on. And none of this has gone away. And the fact that we only now have somebody like Greta in the movement is really scary when you look at the fact that this has been going on for 50 years. We're reacting very late, unfortunately, to a lot of things that we should react to much quicker. So we have to be aware. We have to be aware of the world that we're living in. And also, we have to be aware of the consequences of what we do. Design is a lifestyle job to most of them. I have not yet met a designer who was forced to become a designer because of his parents. I know doctors who studied medicine because of their parents. I know lawyers who studied law because of their parents. But I have not met any designers who were forced to become designers. They do it, we do it because we want to. We have to realize that what we do is we design messages, we shape communication, we translate content, we amplify, and we multiply. And multiplication is most obvious when it comes to packaging. I've chosen some samples of Pentagon work, whether it's a special drink or whether it's cosmetics where you design as a graphic designer, you even get into designing the shape of the bottles. Amazing stuff, great projects, fun projects. Make it work, make it sell. But don't forget the materials you're using, don't forget the state of the world. You cannot separate the two. You cannot, on one hand, complain about this and be a designer who says, oh, wow, we've got a packaging job. Let's do something crazy. Keep it in mind. Be aware of what you do and when and how you do it, and of your responsibilities. Design is not just about making something look good, because that's easy, especially now with computers making everything look good. Look at Instagram. Every idiot can take a picture that looks good. But it's about making something that works. And I guess what that means, that is for designers to influence. What does it mean something works? We have to be aware of the state of the world, of politics, of history, of design history, of culture, of business issues, of social issues, of language, of production issues, of environmental issues, of finance, of everything. You cannot be a good designer unless you are aware of what's going on in all phases of your work. And we all talk about phases when we talk about our own projects, but there are phases which we don't usually call a phase. I try to have those 7 phases that I think are symptomatic because they talk about what your responsibilities are as a designer. Phase 1 is you're sitting in your studio, somebody calls you up, it's a potential client. They talk about sending you an NDA, which is a non-disclosure agreement, so you keep all that secret, and then they would send you a brief, and they ask you to send a fee proposal. And you send it. And this is where that project could stop already. If your fee proposal doesn't work, if what you write in it doesn't work, that could be the end of that story. So the trick is to get to the next phase. You need to submit a fee proposal that the client appreciates, and then ideally he would say, okay, I think this is all okay, let's talk about detail, but let's go forward. So you plan and agree the project structure. You then develop a strategy based on the brief that you've agreed. You think about ideas, because you're a designer, that's your job. You develop concepts and a vision for that client. Then you start visualizing your ideas. This is all done in your studio. You have to do reality checks. I think that's important to know, that when we design, we can design things that won't work. So we have to know what the purpose is of the design. And we have to start planning, because when you design something, you always have to remember that if you win, you are the one who has to implement that design. And implementation means printing it, producing it. If you discover later that it doesn't work, you will look really stupid. So all that needs to be part of your creative thinking. You then, this is important, you have to prepare the presentation. You have to write a story, and you have to create visuals, and eventually present it to the client. So that's where you have to perform as a presenter. And again, this could be the end of the project. This is where the client could say, I don't like any of it, or often they don't even say anything. You could be out of business after that, or if you're lucky, you get the job to actually implement your design, which is when your design is reproduced and is communicated to the outside world. So in the first phase of this whole story, you and the designer work together. You and the client work together. So the client writes you a brief, you would call him up. It's a situation where you get to know the client, and the client wants to get to know you. What happens more often these days is the clients actually ask you to participate in a video call. We didn't have that until about a year ago, but it happens more often now, that they just want to check you out. They want to see, what do you look like? How do you talk? It's pretty, to me, quite difficult, because, you can have a good day or a bad day. And those calls are quite, then you look at 4 people that you've never met, and they ask questions and you're not quite sure who is who. So this phase is very important, because you have to get to that phase, right? So this is where you talk about, okay, well, if we do this, then maybe your brief, and you talk to the client, your brief as you sent it, doesn't make sense here or there. Maybe we can improve the brief. It's very important that you challenge what comes from the client side, because you're the one who has to then work with this. So here you have to agree on the future of the project development. Then the next 3 phases, you're basically by yourself. You go back to your studio and you develop, unless you have agreed with the client that the client sits next to you. Sometimes that happens, and you sort of work and bounce ideas back and forth. But usually you go back, and alone or in your team, you develop the so-called design concept, the visuals, and you create the presentation. Then you present to the client. That's where you usually meet the client, not in Corona times, but this is often the first and only physical meeting. And if you win, you are then faced with meeting with a lot of productioners, third parties, copywriters, photographers, signage manufacturers, and so on. So this is where your design becomes real. Each of these phases requires the designer to play different roles, and he has to have many qualities and skills to be able to survive all these phases. In big agencies, you have a number of people that look after parts of this project. You have strategists, you have people who write proposals only, You have planners, you have account managers, you have creative directors who are only involved in phase one. You have designers who are then involved in the implementation, also productioners, art workers, visualizers, people who only glue design to boards for presentation or create presentation PDFs and so on. But often enough, it's only you doing all of that. So instead of having all these people in a big agency, it could be just you. So if we look at that chart that I've shown before, I've just tried to say what you need to be, where and when. In phase one, when you are first having contact and you're looking at a brief and you need to write a proposal, you have to be a new business getter. You have to be a salesperson, a financial planner, a project planner, a curator of your own portfolio. In other words, what do you show the client to win him? You have to be a journalist and researcher, because you can't submit a proposal unless you write something about the client, and then you have to know who the client is. You have to think strategically. You have to be a copywriter and author of those words. You don't know what happens to your proposal. It might be read by people who have high expectations. And what you have to do is you have to investigate the potential client. You have to try and understand his business. You have to understand the market that he's in. You have to study the brief that he gives you, the written brief. There usually is one, very carefully. And you have to be aware of possible pitholes. For example, are there unrealistic deadlines in the brief? Does he ask for a free pitch? Does he want you to work for free? All things that you have to be aware of, and that you should maybe then say, well, in that case, he's not the right client for me. Often there are NDAs, which is the agreement that you sign before you even get information about secrecy, where they have huge penalties. It says, so if any of the information leaks and you're guilty, then you're guilty up to an amount of $100,000 or something. If you have to read through everything. You have to understand it. It's hard work. Next phase. In that phase, you are a consultant, a team player. You're a diplomat, a thinker, a problem solver, a teacher, a realist, and a decision maker. All this. And what you have to do is you have to demonstrate that you know your business. It's very important, because if the client starts having doubts about your capabilities, he might just drop you. You have to discover the client's expectations. Often what the brief says is different to what the client actually expects. Also, in your proposal, you might have written something that makes sense to you, but the client understands something completely different. So it's very important that you understand what the client expects. You plan the way forward. You shouldn't overpromise, and you should make sure the client feels comfortable and trusts you. In the middle part of the project, which is what I call the creative phase, you have to be a visionary, but also strategist. You have to be creative. You have to be a critic of your own work. You have to be very critical with your own work. Always keep pushing yourself. You have to be a visualizer, a planner, a craftsperson, illustrator, typographer, photographer, artist, dreamer, realist, optimist. And what you have to do is you have to think about what you do all the time, and you have to design until the deadline. Don't think you've got it at the beginning. Investigate different possibilities. Try as hard as you can. And always remember that your design has to perform when it comes to implementation. This is boring. I dropped this one. Then you have to produce. This is about producing your presentation. You have to produce a really stimulating, exciting presentation. So it's not enough to do good work for the creative presentation. You have to present it, and the presentation has to be curated and designed. Do more than is expected. So if you promise to show 5 examples, show 7 or show 10. Think of other things that you could show. It's all about convincing the client about your idea, and be a good presenter. And then the phase 6, this is crucial, because the presentation of creative stuff is especially for young designers very difficult. When we design, it comes from our heart, and we feel that what we've done is our personal baby. And if the client doesn't show appreciation, we get upset, we're hurt. And we have to learn to not show this. So as you have to be an actor, you have to be an excellent presenter, you have to be able to listen in the presentation to what the client says, to understand what his problems are with what you showed. You have to be a mediator sometimes, because often the client, there are 3 or 4 people from the client side and they start discussing. So you have to try to bring peace into the whole thing. You have to be a spin doctor. You have to promise things. You have to be your own agent, basically. What is not good is if you go into the presentation as the designer, because that possibly shows your weakness. You have to go in as an account manager or as the salesperson and sell your design like it is someone else's. Remember, I think this is important, this space is about winning. It's not about selling your design, it's about winning. And what might happen is that the client says, I'm not sure about this, but maybe we should try this. So you're still in the project, which is good. The worst thing that can happen is that you get upset and the client thinks, oh, this person is too emotional. I cannot, that's not a good partner to work with. Maybe we should stop the project. And so finally, phase 7, which is probably the longest phase in the whole thing, it just looks very short here. Here you have to be a team player. You have to coordinate a lot of third-party suppliers and producers of things. You have to be a specialist. You will be asked, the client will ask a lot of questions. How does that work? What about UX? If we do an app, what about signage? Does that actually work in 3D? And all these things, and you have to have answers. Maybe not immediately, but if you need help, you need to know where to find help, and you should try to have people that you can trust, that you can ask questions to. So try to keep, it sounds really banal, but really part of what we do is we have to keep the clients happy. Clients come from a different world. They're not designers. They don't understand how long things take. They have expectations. They think, product, I'm buying, I'm paying money for it. This is the deadline. That's where I get it. It's got to perform. They think differently. Maybe in their standard normal life, they're selling shoes or whatever. You can produce a shoe. If the shoe is okay, you sell it, it's done. Design is different. It needs constant tweaking and constant work. And so, I've got 20 minutes. I'm checking my watch here. So also think in this phase, very important, if you've agreed on a number of projects to be for implementation, whilst you do this, try to discover other things that could be done to extend the project, because that means you can write more invoices. Also, you will have more experience doing it and more fun. And also think that ideally you would make this client into someone who would come back with other projects in the future. So it's very important that everything you do there works out and that you don't make mistakes. You have to be in control. There we go. Now, what I think is very important is the last word here. I know that design is about passion. That's why we want to do it in the first place. Then eventually design is all about knowledge and intelligence, because without that, design cannot be good. But really what is often underestimated is the element of craft. And I'm not sure what craft is in Italian. You'll probably know better than me, but craft is what you learn in school, ideally. And it's, if we want to be really simplistic, all the examples I showed you and all the examples of, if you go to the Pentagon website, what designers do is they combine type with image or image with type. But that's most of the work that we do is about combining those two elements. Sounds very simple, but there is so much to it. And without craft, it cannot be done well. Just a few examples. Everybody has seen this. But maybe not everybody knows why we think that the stick on the left is thicker than the stick on the right. It's simply to do with our eyes. Our eyes see horizontal lines thicker than vertical lines. If you take this thing here, perfect square, if you take them apart, you suddenly think the one on the right is wider than the one on the left. These are optical illusions. You might all have seen this typeface before. It's Futura. Futura was designed in the 1920s, hand-drawn. And if you didn't know better, you would think that these are perfect circles. Yes? Just perfect in the sense that they're the same width everywhere. But if you look at these two circles, and you have to look carefully, you will notice a difference between the one on the left and the one on the right. And the difference is simply by I've turned the O to its side. And what it shows is the one on the left looks evenly thick, and the one on the right looks like he's thinner on the left and the right. And this is just one of the many things that a designer of typefaces or logos or whatever should know. You shouldn't even think about it. It's just a standard solution. To prove the point, this is a perfect circle, and it looks a bit thin on the left and on the right hand side. And if you increase it a bit, it's just a trick that no client knows, but you have to know it. It's only one example. Another one, it's a big topic always about type, which typeface, and what should be the corporate typeface. And then if you set type, I just had a client, a wonderful client actually, very cultured here. It's a big law firm, a company of lawyers. But the problem is that they have to set their in-house documents in Arial. They have to, because that's the only thing, and they asked their IT people, it's the only typeface that they can guarantee that all the other law firms have, and when they exchange documents, they have to make sure that the text comes out exactly in the same position on somebody else's desktop. So I just set this word setting as an example in Arial. This is how it comes out. It doesn't come out, but this is what it looks like when you set it on your computer. When you don't improve it, and it looks pretty horrible because you have, if you look at the negative space, you have a huge space between the T's and big space between T and E, but very little space between I and N. There's a word that all typographers and designers know. It's called intercharacter spacing or tracking. It's called in Apple. And if you wanted to make this into a logo, you would have to work very hard on it. So in other words, all that digital stuff that was invented since 1984 doesn't really help when it comes to getting design to look good. This is not good. This is what the computer does. So what do? You have to start looking into it. Where do I add space? Where do I take space out? And that's where the manual work starts happening. Unfortunately, a lot of designers do not know how to do this. Another trick that I learned is when you design a logotype, for example, you turn it upside down. So you stop reading it, you just concentrate on the spacing. And it's much more obvious that on the left, it's tighter than in the middle because of those two T's. So you have to do something. This is what craft is about. If you look at the word lovely, this lovely setting, maybe I should have added the word not before it. Because you can see how the typefaces, and they're from different type designers or different type foundries, how they struggle with some letter combinations. LY, for example, is a problem whenever an O is involved, and an L is a problem. An L and an A would be a problem. A V could be problematic. It just shows you that every single, here, these are completely different fonts, has one or two problems. Here, for example, this is too wide, this is too dense. Too wide here, This is sort of okay because of the serifs, but you can see there's too much space here, that's too tight, and so on. You can go through every single one. It doesn't matter when you set it for just for reading text, but if you create it like a headline or if you create it for a logo, you have to look at it in detail. Manual setting works like this. If you have the word lovely, you start with the letters, with the first letters. You move them as close as you want them to be. And then what you have there then dictates the position of the next letter. So the space here is sort of felt to be similar to that, including what's happening inside the letters. And then you carry on. This is not done perfectly, but it sort of shows you how that would be done if you did it by hand. And this is what the computer does. You see the difference? This is more balanced, and the computer, because the way it's programmed by someone, does that. So here you got that space that is too big and is too tight. So we designers know it. I say we know it. We should know. And we also know what's bad. If you look at these logos, I think everybody would agree, apart from the people who own these logos, that these are pretty shitty logos. They're all for hospitals in Germany mainly. But they're kind of, good hospitals with really good doctors and high-tech stuff, but the logos look like really cheap. It's amazing how bad design can be. We know that. But do we really have an eye for what's good and what's bad? This is a company that sells very expensive cars. And they have a nice bird thing with a bee, which is probably inherited. So they've had redesigned this. It's now owned by Volkswagen, this company. But if you look at the lettering underneath it, some of you might already find that there is a problem. You see, if you really want to make sure, this is how I see it. I think, there's too much space here. This is too wide compared to what's happening on the left. So it starts tight and then it opens up. This is what I would do to correct it. One test is there are two E's in that. There are two E's in that logo. So if you take the two E's and keep that distance, you can see this is not balanced. If you look at another car company, Tesla, is very new. Strange, for example, there are 5 letters. They all look like they are made from a system. So you would expect that they are the same width and so on. But interestingly enough, the center of the mark doesn't go through the S. And that means that this thing is also not sitting in the center. It's very strange. But apart from that, also, this is quite tight here and has a lot of space here. So again, if it's not based on a grid, if the letters have different widths anyway, why don't they sort this out? You can see it even better here. See how loose it is? And this is one that is closer to your heart. Juventus. This identity was awarded at D&AD, Designers and Art Directors in London. I don't know what it got, but it got an award. And if you look at the mark, and this is where I'm being really extreme, but this is how I was taught. If you look at the mark, for me, this is too loose and this is too tight, and it's mainly because of the T. So that space here is bigger than whatever space happens here. And that's what I would do, right? And if you compare it to that, you suddenly realize that this is too wide. Often it's tiny, but this is part of our job. We should have an eye for this, that we can't expect the client to do this, nor can we expect the computer to sort this out. But there are also other things that can go wrong. There is, for example, this is an old redesign, the Virgin Group, Mr. Branson in the UK. The logo on the left, the logo on the left was the original one. It looked like it's handwritten. And it actually says Virgin. And then it was redesigned and it was kind of simplified. But because it was simplified, it no longer looks like handwriting. It looks more like a typeface. And suddenly the G looks like a Q. And if you don't know Virgin, if you read it, you read Virkin. And then I'm thinking, why doesn't the designer who did this, why doesn't he see that as a problem? How come that is then implemented and it is not clear? This is another one. Designers are responsible for a lot of stuff, and also often for marketing. And I was on Ibiza, and there was an ice cream shop, not very good ice cream, but it was very expensive. And I should have known, because this was the text that sold the ice cream. And it's so full of verbal shit that don't bother to read all of it, but it's just the way it talks about the ice cream, an emotional journey of decadent flavors and parallel visions. Our products are extremely bohemians, and our lines designed to enhance the highest standards of presentation. Blah. You don't talk about ice cream like that. And anybody who was involved in designing and communicating this brand should have said, stop this. This is not good. This is not doing anything for us. Also, there are other mistakes that you have to be aware of. I took this picture in France. It's obviously, as you can see, like cereal bars and health food. Unfortunately, and the name is the name, K-O-T. In German, if you read this, it's another word for shit. Very unfortunate. Now, maybe they don't export to Germany, which is fine, but if they did, they would not be very popular. And as a designer, you have to keep your eyes open and your ears, and you have to realize, if there is a name, does the name actually travel? Another thing is, this was launched years ago. It's still pretty ugly, I think, but it's a huge industrial conglomerate in Germany. Evonik Industries, it's called. Now, because I grew up in Greece, I know the Greek alphabet. And if you look at the Greek alphabet, all these letters up there look like Greek letters. And the Greek alphabet is the Russian alphabet. It's Cyrillic. If you take that brand logotype to Russia or to Greece, they will read something completely different. They will read Enopik and not Evonik. If you design for a brand that is a global brand, you have to do these checks. You have to make sure that these things do not happen. Maybe they don't even know this, but often, when it's too late and they've spent all the money implementing it, then they're not going to take it back. But it is a problem that is in this, apart from the fact that it doesn't look very nice. But that is a serious problem for me. And then there are other things we should be aware of. Trends. I took this picture in the late 90s in London or early 2000s, but it was a time when everybody was rounding off type. You took a typeface like Helvetica, you rounded off the serifs or the corners, and pop, it looked like a new typeface. It's terrible because it makes the logo date. And this one, I'm sure everybody's aware. This is for everybody who's in advertising. I can't see your faces, and I don't know what you think about this or whether you've seen it, but this is from a Volkswagen advertising. It just happened a month ago or so. And they actually had a car parked, and this colored guy, black guy, comes up and walks around the car, and suddenly a big white hand appears and snips him off the page into that door. This is when all the racism thing was going on in America. It's very unfortunate, but even so, without the whole racism discussion, why would any creative person have such an idea? And why would a creative director or anybody who sees that not say, hang on, stop, this is not good? So my worry is that we often, we don't question enough, we're not critical enough. We allow too many things to happen. So finally, I think if we all know our craft, and if we care about detail, and all this is about detail, design will get better. And now let's all have a cup of coffee. Thank you.
Okay. Francesca, Sensito.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Justus, because I think it's been not a lesson on design, but when I started on the sense of responsibility for the designer, you explained it so well that our job and our role in society is not only to design something, but improve the condition of our lives. And so I'm thinking that the change of this role and this job that we explained with the first timeline is important for show to the young designer that we have to learn day by day that everything is important for express our job in the best way, and because everything is important to learn every day from newspaper, from TV, from the street too, because naming and images are so important for improve the quality of life. And design is exactly this. We must be intellectual before to be designer. We must think, and when you repeat think is important, because not to stop at the first idea that is a mistake of young designer, I think, and is a recommendation so important, because if you have a good idea, okay, stop with this, but go ahead with others, and don't stop your creativity and don't stop your role, that is investigate for produce the best result. So thank you very much for your time. It's been a gift and an honor to have you in our talks. And of course, I'm waiting for meet you in Raffles, Milano, and think that our audience will be so satisfied about this lesson and this tale about design. Thank you very much. Bye to all. We finish in this big conclusion our series of Raffles Talks. Thank you very much. See you soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.